This guy made a list and he checked it twice, but I'm about to be anything but nice. Welcome back to another episode of Let Me in the Library. I'm Rachel, and right now I'm going to talk about all the books that really disappointed me. Strap in if you are not ready to hear opinions that are not the same as your own. Final warning to click off this video, but without further ado, we're going to get started. So we are going to start off with a booktube favorite that I thought was extremely underwhelming, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I don't understand the hype and the craze behind this book. I saw people sobbing. People say this is their favorite book ever, and I just don't get it. I really don't get it. This follows a girl named Addie, and she is like a million years old, and she doesn't do anything interesting for the entire book. It's the first book of V.E. Schwab's work that I ever read, and I was really not that interested in picking up any more books from her after I read this one. But I did change my mind after I picked up Vicious, and this book is not 100% reflective of her writing talent, because if it were, I genuinely do not think I would pick up another V.E. Schwab book, because I just was really disappointed with this one. Put a little minor spoilery thing for now to just talk about why I really don't like it. But early on, we know that Addie LaRue makes a deal with a not quite devil, but basically the devil, and he meets with her throughout the book. And they converse, and it is kind of a, hey, are you going to give me your soul yet deal? And she keeps refusing him, and at the very end, he's like, I've always been in love with you, Addie LaRue. You're the devil. This is a woman with 7 freckles. That's her only talent here. Also, every time we flash back on Addie's life before, when she's been cursed and she just lives forever and people look away from her, they just forget that she exists, she gets into all of these wacky scenarios, like being in a pile of dead bodies because people apparently also think she's dead just because they forget about her when they sneeze, and we just don't see that get resolved. We just move back to the present, and by the time we move back to the past, she's in a different pickle, and we don't get to see her resolve any of these scenarios. And if we had, I think it would have been way more compelling and way more interesting to follow her as a character. The other protagonist in this book doesn't even get introduced until halfway through the book, and I think that he's just boring. He's honestly just boring. And the whole curse of what's going on with these people could have really honestly led to something more interesting, but it was just squandered, and that just is so disappointing, because I really wanted this to be everything that everyone said that it was going to be, and I really felt like there's something severely missing from this story that would make it extremely compelling to me. I wanted some sense of true tragedy or some twist or something that really compels me to follow and root for these characters, and I do not understand how I'm supposed to care about these people because they don't face any consequences and they're just plain boring. 2 people who are cursed just fall in love with each other just because they're both cursed. That's the whole thing. What is the appeal, people? Let me know. I really don't get it. This was super disappointing for me. Next up, I have a book that I was really excited for, and it's I'll Be the One. This was a book I read, I think, back in, I want to say, March, and I read this because a bunch of friends were reading it for the BTS readathon. I was excited about it because it is about a girl who enters this competition for K-pop stars, and it seemed really interesting, and she is a plus-sized competitor, and the only plus-size competitor, so a lot of people look down on her. They don't think that she can do it, and of course she is just as talented as everybody else, in fact probably even more so, and you know, I thought that it would be a fun competitive scenario, and I always love seeing stuff like that, but it very quickly moved away from the competition as soon as that was established, and instead it turned into kind of a romance story, and I really wasn't rooting for the romance that much. I thought that there was going to be more there about K-pop industry and the unrealistic standards that are created, that are perpetuated from the K-pop industry, and that also then inflict a lot of problems and issues with self-image on the people who will watch that stuff, or they would, you know, try to emulate those body types from the celebrities that they look up to. But we really didn't get to see that much of that in this story. And on top of that, I really wanted to see something more, because Sky, the main character, has a whole conflict with her mother, and I thought that there was going to be a lot of like really great deep backstory there, and we just barely got anything from that, and I was really disappointed. I wanted to see more there, and by the end I also kind of felt like it was very cheap, the way that things ended, where it was all of a sudden like, now we're just gonna jet off to another country and see what happens over there, tune in for book 2, and it was like, this is not a complete story, and I just kind of feel like this whole competition that I was promised was really swept under the rug, and I did not get to see everything that I thought I was going to see in this book. It did still have some good merits, and I did still think that it was relatively a decent book. I wouldn't say don't read it, but I would say I really wanted more from this, and I was pretty disappointed. Next up, there is a book series that a lot of people really love and a lot of people really don't love, and that is kind of the whole point of the FANTASERIES book club that I'm in. And the first book series that we picked was We Hunt the Flame, and that's followed by We Free the Stars. This is the Sands of Arawiya series, and there were parts of the series that I did enjoy, I will admit, but this was not great for me. This follows a young woman named Zafira and a young man named something else. Nasir? Was that this book? I think so. And basically we have the Huntress and the Prince of Darkness, and of course they're gonna fall in love with each other. We have a somewhat interesting scenario that's set up, and I did want to really root for these characters, but I didn't like them that much. Unfortunately, we are following these people who have basically no self-awareness, and they cannot just wake up and, like, I just want to shake them sometimes and just be like, just get on with it, because this book takes so long for anything to happen. It's extremely slow writing, and for me, that is not my cup of tea. I would like to see things happen at a more accelerated pace in this case, and I want to see things develop where I care about these characters, but there was really nothing compelling about these characters at all for me. I guess it's kind of like if somebody took a somewhat planned D&D campaign and then like a kid's pretend story and they kind of merged those together, and they didn't really bother to smooth out the parts that would make it really interesting. It's this great magical force, and there are these supernatural powers, and not all of it is 100% explained, but it's explained enough that you kind of understand it. But there really isn't any of that fun part of either of those things. If you were a kid and you were playing pretend with your friends, there's some just ecstatic excitement of playing with it. It doesn't really matter if, like, the story is progressing, because you're just having a good time. But all of that magic is really lost in the story. And it seems like this was a forced found family, because all of these people all of a sudden just band together and decide, like, I would die for you. And it's like, why would you die for this random stranger that you literally just met? And they're like, I would die for the Huntress. It's like, why? You don't know her. You don't live in her village where she hunts for food for you. She's such a martyr that it's like, she would probably die for anything. She is not... She's so annoying. That's my thing. She's so annoying. She has no flaws, so of course, very annoying to me. I love to see flawed characters, and I feel like the flaws in these characters were like, I'm so dark and mysterious, nobody will ever understand me. That does not do it for me. That is not enough for me to actually be compelled to be interested in you. Unfortunately, the We Hunt the Flame series, it did not work out so well for me. I know some people love this series, but I just don't get it. I think you can only love it if you really fall in love with the characters, and that did not happen for me. The next book I want to talk about is a book from an author that I love, but I was really disappointed with this book, and that book is The Therapist by B.A. Paris. I usually love all of B.A. Paris' thrillers. I think they're really fun, they're really interesting, and usually they are domestic thrillers. There was a different B.A. Paris book that I read last year, and I was so highly anticipating it, I could not wait to read it, and when I read it, I realized it was a family drama and not a domestic thriller, so I set myself up for disaster there, imagining there was going to be something really exciting happening that didn't happen because that's just not the genre, but it was still kind of disappointing. I felt like it was extremely repetitive and it was a lot of miscommunication in that sense. So then when I came to this book, The Therapist by B.A. Paris, I knew it was a domestic thriller, so I was really excited, but I don't even think it's because my expectations were too high. I just really don't think that this one delivered. The other books by her that I have really loved contain some little element in them that sets up an unreliable narrator, or it sets up somebody in a situation where you have no idea how they're going to get out of it, and it's just a matter of outsmarting the enemy. That's so interesting to me, and that is the opposite of what we got in this book. This book has immediately left my brain. The other books by B.A. Paris that I've read that I've enjoyed, they're stuck in here. I can't get rid of them because they're so great, and they're so fun, and I highly recommend them because they're so great, but this story is like, it was gone the next day. I don't even remember anything about this book. It was just a really, really average domestic thriller, and I really expected more from my personal queen of domestic thrillers. Speaking of thrillers that disappoint, unfortunately, I have another book by an author that I really, really love the work of, and this was such a shock that it did not follow suit with the other books of hers that I've read this year. I have read a bunch of Tiffany D. Jackson books this year. I have read Grown and Monday's Not Coming and Allegedly, and I was in love with all of them. I thought they were all great. Some of them I loved a little bit more than others, but they were all really fantastic stories, and they all kept me on the edge of my seat. And then I read White Smoke, and I really did not enjoy this one. This one feels like there's a lot happening all at once, and I don't care. The problem is, I know that Tiffany D. Jackson tends to write stories that are not psychological. They're usually all logical. So there will be a logical explanation for whatever it is that we're witnessing. Of course, if you read a book expecting things to be logical and then you see a bunch of psychological things happen, you're led to believe that the answer is probably psychological. But if you understand that the author is not going to deliver that, it makes all of the tension go away. It's very hard for me to suspend disbelief and to believe that there's going to be some ghosty type of reveal at the end of this. And unfortunately, a lot of that sucked out the enjoyment of this book for me. On top of that, there is a kind of confusing plotline going on with the main character. The main character, Marigold, smokes weed, and in this area that they've just moved to, there are also other folks who might smoke weed, but it's like extremely looked down upon, and she smokes it because of her anxiety, and a lot of people act like it's like the worst crime ever committed. There is a whole point of this book that talks about drug use, and I feel like it was trying to make a point about how it should be legalized and how it should not be a criminal act, because there were some characters who talked about other people that they knew who were put in jail for possession of drugs, and other folks who, like, you know, they had those drugs planted on them and then they were put in prison, and it was a horrible thing that happened. That's half the plot line, but the other half of the weed plot line is that the main character, Marigold, also smokes weed, and she is basically demonized by her entire family for this, and they just think that she has no sense of what's really going on in the real world. And I think that this is meant to be used to prove that she's an unreliable narrator, but in the end, it just feels confusing because her parents obviously can tell that she is dealing with anxiety and she's really, really, really distressed from something that happened earlier on in chronological order that we don't get to find out about right away. But we know that there's something there, and yet they don't ever stop and think that maybe that one time that she used weed, which wasn't even during the events of this book, is not, like, making it so that she has no logical ideas right now. I don't even think she smokes any weed during the events of the book, but the entire time, every time she says anything, everyone's like, you're lying because you're high. And it's like, when? How? Where would she have gotten what? So that makes any sense to me whatsoever. And then the way that things resolved just seemed so comically ridiculous. The reveal of the antagonist and how this forces people to behave in such a way that nobody would ever behave in. They do something that is so ridiculous, and I can't stand by it, and I just think it's so stupid. They also introduced a character, and it was supposed to be kind of like a misunderstood person, but I kind of feel like with the way that it was handled, there was no reason for that person to have received the ending that they did, because in the end, they were kind of an innocent that was roped into the situation, and I find that to just be one of those things that really rubs me the wrong way. But in general, it felt like this book just ended. Like there was a missing chapter or a missing 5 chapters maybe, but this book just ended really abruptly. Like everything was still in chaos, and then the book just ends like, don't worry, I'll save the day. And then we're at the acknowledgements of the book. So I love Tiffany D. Jackson's other work, but this one was seriously such a disappointment. Speaking of disappointments, let's move on. I also really did not like this book that was going around on BookTube recently. And that book is The Keeper of Night. This was a major disappointment for me. I thought that this was kind of just boring. Totally boring. Keeper of Night follows a young girl. I don't even remember her name. She is a Shinigami, so she has like half British, half Japanese blood. And she goes around killing people because that's her job. Whatever. She has to go to Japan, and everybody there treats her like an outsider because they're all like full Japanese Shinigami. So I understand that there was something that was trying to be done here with trying to talk about xenophobia, trying to talk about what it's like to be only half of a certain culture, and trying to talk about the experience of that, and make a point that maybe the reader would sympathize and understand that it really sucks to feel like you aren't connected to this culture that is really a part of you because of the way that you look or the way that people treat you like an outsider. Basically, think about Crazy Rich Asians. You remember that movie? And remember when Rachel showed up in Singapore and everybody was like, you're American-born Chinese, so you don't count. Think about that, except for if it was like every 5 seconds in the movie. That's what this book is. The whole time that she speaks or thinks, she's just like, I'm such an outsider. Everybody treats me like I'm an outsider. I'm an outsider. I'm like, maybe if you stop telling people that you are an outsider every time that you open your mouth, they would stop talking about this all the time, because yes, you don't look like everybody else, which is true, and they're commenting on that. But you can't just keep saying she was an outsider. I think her name was Rin. You can't just keep saying Rin was an outsider, she was an outsider. That's not commentary. That's not anything useful that you are adding to the story or adding to this piece of fiction that you're putting out into the world and hopefully presenting so that people understand the viewpoint of others. It's just a sentence that you keep repeating over and over and over again. And there are a bunch of like little side characters here that I think are totally useless. I did not find them whatsoever interesting. They're literally just meant to be like kind of like comic relief. Like they're not funny, but just like lighthearted relief, I guess, to just make you feel like, oh, this isn't all so terrible. And this story, which is about Shinigamis who kill people, it also has some lighthearted parts because look, there's like a little animal and a little boy and whatever. Rin, the main character, treats her little brother like shit. She does not understand how to treat siblings whatsoever. She treats her brother like garbage. And of course she meets a boy and he makes like one terrible joke and then she just decides that she's in love with him. Once those two inevitably get together, their entire personalities change and it's like a completely different story, and I can't even find a justification of like, oh, I could see what she was doing with it. No, I just really didn't like this one. It was just, what was the point? What was the point? I don't even want to keep reading this series. I just think it's just, why does this exist? I don't get it. Here's a biggie. A lot of people love this book, and I know maybe one person who agrees that this book was not it. And this book that I am stretching out until I tell you about it, is Iron Widow. So, Iron Widow came out, and I was really excited about it. I got an arc for it, and I really, really, really wanted to read it. I've heard such incredible things about it, and everyone's given it 5 stars, and they're saying it's the most amazing feminist fantasy, sci-fi, incredible, whatever. No. The main character seeks revenge against this pilot who killed her sister. So, unfortunately, she gets revenge really fast, and then the entire story is just bonkers after that. This does feature a poly relationship, and that's totally fine. I didn't really feel, great or bad about it either way. I just didn't really connect to the other characters. I really, really, really liked this story when we got to the revenge plot, but as soon as that thing was over, I really had a hard time enjoying the rest of this book. I didn't really understand why anything was happening anymore. It seemed like all of a sudden somebody was able to pull connections, and then they were taking like really racy photo shoots just to advertise to people and prove something, and people acted in ways in which they had really no consequence, and they would just barge into rooms and demand that things happened, and then those things just happened. And I was like, aren't you supposed to be like the lowest caste human who was brought here, and you're like 15, and then you're just bossing around these old generals who would probably never stand for this, but for some reason they just are? There were a lot of plot conveniences and a lot of plot armor that protected certain characters, and even other characters who were not really protected, I felt nothing for them, because even if they got attacked or they got hurt or something like that, it was like, there's no way this is permanent. There's this really, really, really ridiculous cliffhanger at the end of this book that's obviously supposed to get you to pick up book 2, but it made me not want to pick up book 2 because it was so corny and it was just so out of nowhere. Like, I literally felt like if you took this and you put it into a different genre and you wrote about that and you just took like one paragraph and you stuck it at the end of this book. I really don't understand what the point of this was, and I just really, really, really didn't enjoy it, and I'm so sad that I didn't because I had really high hopes for this one. Okay, it's time to move on. We're gonna talk about plain Bad Heroines. I was reading this book because it was recommended to me, and then I did not like it. I thought it was way too long. It was like 800 pages of nothing, and I don't understand the appeal of this at all. It was so slow, and nothing happened, and I didn't like anybody. I had a really hard time even understanding what was going on in this book. I tried reading by audio, I tried reading physically, and there were many times I just really wanted to DNF this book, and I probably should have. But this follows several timelines. We have one in the past, in which there are some young people at the Brookhan's School for Girls, and people die there. And then we have some stuff in the present where they're trying to film a movie about what happened at the Brookhan's School for Girls, and weird things are happening on set, but we don't know how much of it is actually planned by the director and how much of it is not. And then there's also the one good thing was there were a lot of sapphic relationships in this, and I liked that because it was extremely normalized. It wasn't a problem of like coming out or like having to talk about this with people and then have frustrations from people who were homophobic. I think that there was another gay relationship between two men, like the director and his husband, which was also nice. So I really did like to live in just like a normalized society in which nobody faced any kind of discrimination for that. But at the same time, that was the only quality about this book that I liked. It was just not a writing style that I vibed with. Everything was so slow because of the gothic horror nature of it. Nothing happened at all until the very end, and then everything happened so fast. But then the things that happened didn't have any correlation to the other things that happened previously in the story. And I just don't understand how anything is supposed to actually connect with each other because I don't get it. I just don't get it. I would be interested to read a Wikipedia article that explains this story to me, but oh my god, what a waste of time. We're going to talk about a book that I actually own. I think you might know what I'm about to say if you're a certain somebody who watches this channel, and I think if you are, you might want to look away now. The book I'm going to talk about is Where Dreams Descend by Danielle. I bought this book, I pre-ordered it, I was really excited, it's a beautiful cover, I've held it up in many a TBR video and said, I'm so excited to read this, and then I read it. I really do like this book. I actively have a anger issue maybe. I feel active rage when I think about this book's narration style. I read the audiobook for this one, and I hated the narrator for this book so much. It honestly probably ruined the whole story for me. And even if this was something that I would have originally vibed with, I think it would have literally just ruined the whole story for me. So I highly don't recommend the narration because it was horrible. It was literally the worst narration I've ever heard in my life, and I just listen to audiobooks most of the time, so I know what I'm talking about. This narrator puts on a fake British accent and then has to play like 5 different characters, and they all sound absolutely horrible because this person does not know how to put on a British accent. It sounds like when your friend is like, I can speak British, let me try, and they all just say the same exact thing about like tea and crumpets and stuff, and you're just like, okay, I'm gonna humor you, but only for about 10 seconds, and then you better stop, except for the audiobook is 18 hours, so I couldn't stop. It was so long, and I hated it. Let me talk about the actual book, though. This is promised to be a Phantom of the Opera retelling. It's not. This is also promised to be a really tragic love story of enemies to lovers. It's not. And it's also promised to have a really interesting, wild ending that leaves you hanging and you just can't wait for book 2, and it just holds you at the edge of your seat. It doesn't. So, this is a story about a young girl named Kalia, and I now hate that name. She runs away to this competition event that disappointed me. This competition event, basically all these people compete with magic, and she was born with magic powers, so she can use her magic powers, but other people have to learn how to use magic powers. But of course, because she was born with magic powers, she's really good at using her magic powers. So, whenever they do these competitions, she blows everybody away, and she is so good, but she is the outlier because usually women don't get to be magicians, usually they get to be like the assistant. So instead, she has a male assistant, and she hangs out like, I am on top, and I'm a girl boss, and I can do magic. She will do her magic powers thing, and everybody is so amazed and wowed, and in the next show, she'll do the exact same thing, and everybody's amazed and wow, and then the next show, she'll do something else amazing, and everybody's so amazed. So you can see, this book obviously has a lot of ups and downs. Kalia does all these things, and she is just the most annoying about it the entire time. She's entirely insufferable. She just constantly is like trying to pick fights with people all the time, knowing that you are kind of like the minority here, being the only woman who's able to perform magic and do this stuff in front of an audience. You would probably kind of think that maybe you want to keep a lower profile so that way maybe you could impress the judges later, or you at least don't want to like actively antagonize the judges, but that is the opposite of what Kalia does. So she makes everybody angry at her, and she ends up stuck with the only person who is so much of an emo simp that he can't stand up to her, and that is DeMarco, her mentor. So DeMarco used to be a magician, and he hangs out with her, and they just are sad together, and it's extremely boring, and nothing happens until finally they're like, we're in love with each other just because. There's old secrets from Kalia's past and DeMarco's past, and they're running away from these secrets, and then at the end, something crazy happens. It doesn't. The crazy thing that happens at the end of this book was extremely underwhelming. I thought that it was like, if you were watching this and it was a Netflix show, this would be like the end of episode 3. So it gets you to watch episode 4, but it is nowhere near season finale material to get the season renewed. I just genuinely feel like either nothing happens or ridiculousness happens, and it's always like my biggest pet peeve. Really not for me. Okay, Darian, you can come back now. I'm ready to talk about a different book. Okay, so the next book that I want to talk about is The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter. The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter is supposed to follow basically the daughter of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, who is going around and like collecting different women who are like also products of or children of famous mad scientists. She finds these women and they kind of band together and they sort of have this weird found family society of, you know, women who are distressed. But I did not like the vibe of this book because of the writing style in it, in which basically they will interrupt and say like, that's not how it happened, it was like this, and they'll talk over each other, but it's just like a lot of random bickering. They don't really interrupt the story to say anything remotely interesting to actually shift the story and say it actually happened like this. They'll just say like, oh, actually I was wearing red that day. So it's like, okay, why'd you even mention that? It takes place during a time in which everyone is very stuffy and they try to like shove feminism at you, but in ways that really don't fit the timeline. So like they'll wear pants and be like, look, I'm wearing pants. And then everyone's like, oh my God, she's wearing pants. So they try to like show you these moments like this to be like, isn't that ridiculous that women couldn't wear pants? And it's like, yeah, I guess it was pretty ridiculous. But then they have like the main person also being a dick about wearing pants. So she's like, you can't wear pants. And it's like, aren't you supposed to be on the side of these women? If you want to wear pants and get this job done, you're trying to like literally take down evil scientists. We don't have time for this. Just put the pants on and get going, Barbara. My favorite character was this little feral child named Diana, and she was really fun. She was the only character in this book that I really genuinely cared about, and every time that things happened, I was looking for her on the page. She was the person that I was interested in, but everybody else, generally, I couldn't really care less. I thought they were okay, but I also was really expecting this story to maybe follow younger people, kind of in the case of Charlotte Holmes, in which we're following like high school level people, and maybe not during the time period that it was, but of course, that's just what the book is, and it kind of does matter where you put your expectations before you pick the book up, and that will drastically change how disappointed you are in the story. So that one kind of might be on me, but also, I really didn't like the way that the story was moving along with those little things here and there, and also like randomly introducing Sherlock Holmes, and then he was like really not helpful. So I also want to talk about a book called Disfigured. This was a book that I picked up because the nonfiction baddies were talking about it. This is supposed to be basically a collection of ideas about fairy tales and why a lot of the times people in fairy tales who have disabilities or disfigurements are always treated really poorly in the story, and then they come out of the other end, if they're a good guy, with all of these like body parts back that they lost, or if they're a bad guy, not having those things back, and it's served as a punishment. So parts of this book I thought were interesting. However, there are certain things about this book that I can't forgive. First of all, There's just random chapters that are just praising Kate Middleton for no reason, just because she's a princess, so that didn't make sense. There was some stuff in here about how The Little Mermaid is supposed to be a metaphor for cerebral palsy, but I don't understand if that's supposed to be, like, the tail or without the tail, or how does that work? So that was never explained. And also, the author just randomly decided to spoil the end of Game of Thrones for no reason, like 2 times in a row. So I was listening to this audiobook like, excuse me, there's no reason for you to be talking about this, I'm not caught up. This show hasn't been out for that long that you could just start talking about this stuff and just not put a spoiler warning. So she ruined the end of Game of Thrones for me, so I was like, great, thanks for telling me that. And I paused the book like, geez. I also don't know why you made this point, because it has nothing to do with the point you're trying to make, talking about like mental health in a way that has really nothing to do with the actual points that she was making. And so then I turned the audiobook back on, and then she just spoiled something else in Game of Thrones. So I could not. I really could not. And none of the points that she was making there were valid. I feel like she just wanted to talk about the end of Game of Thrones, and it was just really disappointing. I wanted a lot more from that book, and it did not deliver. Okay, I have only a few more disappointing books to talk about. To start off with, let's talk about Payback's A Witch. This was another WHINERS book club book, and oh my god, I didn't like this book. I really thought that this was going to be another revenge plot story, but it really quickly takes away and again turns into a competition that doesn't deliver what is promised. I feel like this book had a lot of weird writing style choices because it's kind of flip-flopping between a not very compelling romance and then a lot of drama with a family thing happening back home where all these people have to compete with different magical abilities because they're all different families of witches and whoever wins will get something, but I honestly didn't care enough to pay attention to whatever it was that you would win because it was boring. And then also, like, problems with the main character's career back home and not knowing if she should move back to Chicago or if she should work remotely from this town that she fell back in love with. And it was just really, really bizarre because the whole reason that the main character left this town, which propelled the entire plot forward, was because her boyfriend broke up with her when they were in high school, and then she was just so heartbroken that she left town. And she moved to Chicago and never came back. And then this all happens because she comes back from Chicago and is like, that boy is here and he broke my heart and I declare bankruptcy, revenge.
I declare bankruptcy!
On top of that, then like other women in town are like, oh, he broke my heart too. And they're all just like, we'll just get revenge on him. And then also fall in love. So it was weird. I did not enjoy this one. I thought it was just really bizarre and strange, and I really did not like the writing style. From like chapter 1, I was already like, oh my god, I'm not gonna like this book, and I was right. Another book I didn't like, unfortunately. It was a gift, and it was another WHINERS book club book. I did not like The Lost Apothecary, sadly. I read this for the WHINERS book club, and we talked about this for a live show, and very, very sadly, this one really did not work out for me and a lot of the other people on the show. This one is promising, again, a revenge plot that doesn't deliver. And this is basically saying that there's this special hidden apothecary somewhere. You'll be able to get these tiny vials of poison to kill any man in your life that is ruining your life, basically. But you're not allowed to kill women, you can only kill men. So it follows the apothecary, who is distributing these poisons to people, but it's just really boring. And I feel like revenge and murder and killing men is not supposed to be boring, but this was so boring. And it was also a lot about periods and pregnancy and just usually like the classically female things that I feel like we should have moved away from. So the fact that we haven't is really disappointing, and I just kind of feel like this book promised a lot of things that it could not deliver upon. It also takes place in 2 timelines, and unfortunately, things just get repeated over and over again. Things happen in the past, and then they happen in the present, and then they happen in the past, and then they happen in the present again, and we just talk about it because the person in the present is like basically trying to act as a historian and learn about what was happening in the past. So as soon as event A happens in the past, in the present, she'll be like, oh, have you heard about event A? It was so disappointing to read something like this and expect so much from it, and it just didn't deliver any of that. But I think that for now is going to wrap up my list of really disappointing books for this year. Hopefully I haven't ruined too many friendships. I will have another video of all the books that I really hated and really loved. So keep your eyes out for that. That's it from me. I'm Rachel, this is Let Me Library, and I will see you next time. Bye!